How did the invincible army of Cyrus the Great get defeated? How did Alexander the Great fight against an army of 7 million soldiers? Does it mean that Alexander was also immortal? Well, there's a lot to talk about here. Welcome to my channel. Today, we will be talking about Persian Empire, the first superpower in history that only Alexander could defeat. Let's get into it. Alexander the Great may have been the greatest military commander in history, or he may have been the most lucky. He led his Macedonian army deep into Persia, defeated their armies in several major battles, and laid siege to their capital, Persepolis, where he set fire to its palaces and burnt it down. Despite all this, many still say that Alexander was not the one who actually defeated the Persian Empire. Many scholars claim that it was the Persian queen, Darius, who actually defeated Alexander by killing him and dumping his body into the river. And some even go as far as to say that it was the environment which defeated Alexander the Great. The Achaemenid Empire, better known as the Persian Empire, was the first superpower in history. It was huge. At its largest extent, it stretched from Central Asia to the Mediterranean Sea, from the Arabian Peninsula to the Caucasus, and from Anatolia to Central Asia. It encompassed the entirety of Western Asia and much of the Middle East. Its total population was around 7 million people, and if you are wondering how exactly 7 million people is a small number, well, at its peak, Rome had around 1 million citizens, so imagine 7 of Rome's at the same time. That is truly a huge empire. When Alexander invaded Persia, it was under the rule of King Darius I. During his reign, the Persian king reformed the army, making it more disciplined, and introduced the concept of ranks to their previously classless society. But despite this, the army was still very diverse. There were Persians, Medes, Babylonians, Egyptians, Turks, Indians, Scythians, Greeks, Cimmerians, and many more. But regardless of their diversity, they were extremely loyal to their king. According to Plutarch, a Greek historian, the soldiers of Persia would rather die than surrender, and that they fight until the last man, because surrendering to the enemy would be shameful for them. Now, why did Alexander manage to defeat such a large and diverse empire? Firstly, let's look at the size of Alexander's army. Throughout his father's campaign, Philip II of Macedon had greatly expanded the Macedonian army. By the time of his death, the Macedonian army consisted of 10,000 elite infantrymen called the Companion Cavalry and 8,000 more cavalrymen. The Companion Cavalry was Philip's personal bodyguard, consisting of 10,000 elite troops hand-picked by Philip himself. They were loyal to the royal family and would follow them till death. Also, in times of peace, these troops would take care of the horses, making sure that the cavalry was always ready for battle. Then there were the cavalrymen, which would scout ahead and harass the enemy while the phalanxes were marching. This meant that out of the 38,000-strong army, roughly 18,000 were either elite infantry or cavalry, meaning that the core of the army was extremely powerful. Another reason for Macedonia's victory was their use of the phalanx formation. The phalanx was a tactical military formation used by the Macedonian army. It consisted of heavily armed infantrymen armed with long spears and shields. Their shields were made of wood and covered in leather, while their spears were around 18 feet long. To put that into perspective, the average height of a male back then was around 5 feet. So imagine 18-foot-long spears being thrown at you. The main advantage of the phalanx was that since all of its members were connected to each other via their overlapping shields, it was almost impossible to break through. If anyone managed to get past one rank, they would simply get surrounded by the next. In order to get through the phalanx, you would need to attack from the sides, breaking the connection between the shields. But once you got through, you would simply face another rank. This is what happened to the Persian army at the Battle of Cheronea. There was a group of elite Persian soldiers called the Immortals. They were given that name because no matter how many Immortals died in battle, their numbers remained the same. If 10 Immortals died, 10 more would simply replace them. They were considered the best soldiers of the Persian army and were present at all important battles. The Immortals weren't a match for the Macedonian phalanx and were easily wiped out. After the loss of their Immortals, the rest of the Persian army panicked and fled the battlefield, giving the Macedonians a decisive victory. But the most important factor in Alexander's victories was his ability to adapt to new situations. He didn't just rely on the phalanx. Instead, he knew when to use it and when not to. For example, at the Battle of Granicus River, the phalanx wasn't effective since he was fighting on uneven ground, so he switched to a more open formation, defeating the Persians. His ability to learn quickly and adapt was key to his victories against the Persian Empire. However, despite Alexander's best efforts, he didn't manage to defeat the Persian Empire. Historians disagree on who really defeated Alexander the Great. Some blame it on the Persian queen Tamiris, others on the environment, and yet others say it was the Persian king Darius I. While the last two are reasonable, they aren't really true since Alexander managed to defeat both of them multiple times in battle. But it was the third option which was responsible for the end of Alexander the Great. Tamiris was the queen mother of Persia. When her son, King Darius III, was away at war with the Greeks, she ruled in his place. The main goal of her rule was to keep the empire intact while her son was away. However, upon hearing of his defeats at the hands of the Greek king, she decided to take matters into her own hands. She summoned her son back home and took command of the army herself. Now there are two accounts of how exactly she killed Alexander the Great. The first one comes from Plutarch, a Greek biographer, according to whom Tamiris was advised by her husband's advisors to kill Alexander. Naturally, this didn't sit well with her, but she was desperate. So she hatched a plan. She invited Alexander to her court and bribed his generals to get him drunk. Then, while he was sleeping, she sent an old man to his tent and told him to tickle him with a feather. According to Plutarch, Alexander woke up and found it very funny, and the two of them became friends. She then hosted a great feast in his honor, inviting his entire army. The next day, Alexander got all the generals drunk again, and this time he sent someone to Tommy's chambers. According to Plutarch, the queen saw right through this and avoided getting tricked. Yet again, the next day, Alexander came to her chambers himself, but he was met by her eunuchs, who sprayed him with perfume. The smell knocked him out cold, and the queen's men dumped him into the nearby river. While some accounts say that it was poisoned, it doesn't seem likely since it was summer and the water would have warmed him up. He probably died of a cold. The second account is from Arrian, a Greek historian, according to whom Alexander's demise was much more brutal. When Alexander arrived at Susa, he noticed that the locals refused to serve him wine unless he managed to guess the identity of the blind old man sitting in front of the temple of the god Mithras. Each time Alexander approached, the old man would curse him and his army, calling them thieves and murderers. Finally, unable to bear it anymore, Alexander ordered his men to bring the old man to his court. As he was walking to the palace, Alexander asked him why he cursed him, to which the old man said, "You'll find out soon enough." When they arrived at the palace, Alexander chained him to a chariot like a horse and whipped him to death. The old man turned out to be none other than the Persian king Darius III. So the question still stands: who actually defeated Alexander the Great? Well, it depends on what you think. I personally think that it was neither the Persian queen nor his generals who defeated Alexander. Instead, it was the vastness of his empire. Alexander the Great had never stayed in one place for too long. He was always moving, always conquering new lands and meeting new people. After the death of his father, he set out to conquer the Persian Empire, something which his father failed to do. And he did so, but after defeating the Persian king in battle, he realized that defeating the empire itself was nearly impossible. No matter how much he pushed, the Persians kept coming back. No matter how many times he defeated them, they kept sending more soldiers. At some point, Alexander realized that he wouldn't be able to subjugate the entire empire, so he simply moved west, starting a new conquest. It was the size of his empire which defeated Alexander. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to leave a like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.